Hey guys, it's Russell Linville. Thanks for tuning in. Today's Throwers Thursday. This is the first one that I'm doing. So here's the deal. We're going to go over the initial evaluation. How do I evaluate and determine what exercise progression program is appropriate for a throwing athlete? What stage of healing are they in? What's their tolerance to movement? What's their some of their objective measures? We're going to go through my checklist of the things that I make sure I ask during this evaluation, and some of the things that I definitely will measure or observe during the initial evaluation. And so hopefully this will help some of your athletes and maybe enlighten you onto, hey, these kids are under a tremendous amount of load and stress. Let's take it easy on their arms. So the first thing, subjectively, these kids are usually here with their parents, and so sometimes they help with the history taking, but does the player play on multiple teams per year? And if they do, what's their primary and their secondary positions? So we know that there's a threefold increase in risk of injury if your primary position is pitcher and your secondary position is catcher. And you think about that, every single pitch that's thrown, let's say you're a starting pitcher, you go and you throw, you throw 50 pitches. The reliever comes in, you switch to catcher, now you throw another 50 throws back. So you've essentially doubled your workload, even though your pitch count stays relatively low. Do you play on multiple teams per year? We have kids that they're on 2, 3, some that are on 4 teams. We count showcases and different tournaments that we're doing. Do they play more than 8 months out of the year? If you play more than 8 months out of the year, your arm doesn't have ample time to rest. I think the most recent suggestion is you need 3 consecutive months of no throwing to allow your arm and your muscles and your joint structures to actually recover, right, from a season. Do you participate in other sports? This kind of goes hand in hand with, do you play 8 months or greater out of the year? If you play another sport, hopefully that's a time where you're resting from throwing and you're focused on something else like your speed, agility. Maybe you play football or maybe play basketball. Maybe you're a lacrosse player. You're taking stress away from your arm, giving that arm ample time to rest. You're still becoming a better athlete. And actually what we're seeing is these people who get drafted, these are the multi-sport athletes. They play 3 or 4 sports at their high school every year. So they take a little break and they're better athletes for it. What's your pitch count maximum in the past year? I like to get a sense. I think the stat, the odds ratios shoot up above like 2.5 if you're throwing more than 400 pitches over the course of a season. And we're talking about, high school baseball here. I don't think we're talking about whatever a college pitcher's throwing. And hopefully by that time their tissues have adapted a little better. They're a little stronger, a little more resilient, that they can adapt to some of the stresses of throwing. But always ask about how many pitches they think they've thrown in the last year. Do they throw breaking pitches? Now, interestingly enough, there's not a lot of research out there that suggests that curveballs actually cause arm pain, but there is a correlation between pitch velocity and arm pain. So if you're throwing really, really hard at a young age, say you're one of these kids that grows really fast, and you can whip the ball very fast at a young age, your tissues might not have matured enough to be able to tolerate the stress of that pitch. So we always make sure how are you throwing breaking balls? If so, what breaking balls are you throwing? And then also, how fast can you throw your fastball? If they can throw pretty fast, we know that they're higher risk of injury. Now, it's funny, because I ask these, they're here, usually working with me because they are injured or they are having some pain. But this is a great a little side note here. It's a great talking point with the player and the parents on how do we prevent this from happening in the future. So once we get you better, how do we make sure that this never happens again? So these are great talking points, and we refer to them throughout their course of physical therapy or rehab. So as we go down the list here, do you pitch with arm fatigue? That's the big one. There's a 36-fold increased risk of injury, when you pitch with arm fatigue. And if you ask any baseball player, I guarantee those pitchers, they will tell you they pitch with arm fatigue. So what are we doing here? We need to have ample rest, especially these high school players that really rely on like one guy to get them through the season. Those kids are at huge increased risk of injury. So we gotta make sure that we're taking care of these people. We're educating coaches and parents. Do you pitch with arm pain? Obviously, you should not be pitching with arm pain, but I like to know if they try to push through something like that. So that's kind of, just a little breakdown here of the subjective portion of my questioning, outside of all the normal things you would ask. Where is it hurting? How to get injured? Did you feel a pop? Did you, all those subjective questions that you guys are pretty good at. This is just diving a little deeper into their competition risk factors. These are usually the ones that are non-modifiable once they get to you. So we want to know really, how do we change, what are the modifiable risk factors so that we can prevent this from happening again? So we move over here to our objective portion. And of course, we're going to look at things like range of motion, strength, and their motor control. But certain things, and actually, so next Thursday, we're going to be going over how do you measure this. So today we're talking about what you measure. And next Thursday, I'm going to demonstrate and show you how you measure these things. So range of motion, we look at flexion. All these are actually done with a patient laying supine and the therapist or the athletic trainer taking them through these ranges of motion. And we block the scapula, so we get true glenohumeral range of motion. And there's some different things that position-wise that we want to make sure of to get an accurate measurement. But we know that these measurements, if you're lacking in some of these areas when we compare side to side, throwing arm versus non-throwing arm, it could put you at increased risk of injury. And we see it a lot of these range of motion adaptations, whether it's through bony adaptations or if you have shoulder laxity essentially from increased load. We know there's some side-to-side differences in throwers. Naturally speaking, your arm has to adapt to the stress of throwing. So there's some certain range of motion. If it gets above or below a certain point, you might be at increased risk of injury. And a lot of these guys that are here, we see that, or else they probably wouldn't be here, right? But the things we go through is shoulder flexion, external rotation at 90 degrees, internal rotation at 90 degrees. We look at their total arc of motion. So how far from from neutral here can they get back into external and all the way into internal? What's that range of motion, that arc or that rainbow of motion? That's probably more important than external or internal, measured in an isolated manner. And then finally, one of the big ones I look at is horizontal adduction. How far can they get their arm across their body with a blocked scapula? Might suggest they have tight posterior muscles, right? Their posterior chain is working really hard to decelerate the arm. It's just my theory. Are they having capsular tightness? Probably not. The capsule's pretty robust and pretty tolerant to things, but I think there's a muscular adaptation that might occur to help stabilize that arm as it's going through the motion violently, right? So when we look through at strength, things we measure here, and we do this with a handheld dynamometer, so we get actual digital readout of what their strength measurements are, is scaption, external rotation at 0, external rotation at 90, and then internal rotation at 90. And those last two we do actually in prone, and we stabilize their shoulder off the edge of the table, and we try to get a measurement of that. We do have a Biodex machine, so if you have access to one, that would be probably a preferred method, but a quick and dirty one is using the handheld dynamometer. And so we're looking for a strength ratio there. Your external rotators are at least 2/3 as strong as your internal rotators, and that seems to decrease their risk of injury when they get back. So we do a lot of posterior chain work. So if there's a big deficit here, it tells us what we're going to work on, right? We're going to work on a lot of cuff, a lot of scapular stabilization, all those things you would think of for a thrower. This just helps put a number to it. And then finally, we look at motor control. Does the kid have scapular dyskinesia, right? Is their motor control through their scapulohumeral rhythm, is it pretty wonky looking? Are they winging out? What's that look like? Is their thoracic spine not extending as they're lifting overhead? Are they always in this slouched posture position? You see a lot of throwers with horrible, static posture. And does that correlate to them, having arm pain? Maybe, but I know that if I'm going to be throwing a ball as hard as I can, I want my spine to be flexible so my kinetic chain can work more efficiently. So, we look at those sorts of things as well. Core bracing, are they even able to stabilize their spine? Are they able to create a neutral spine, like some of the videos we went over, talked about earlier this week? And then what's their single leg squat look like? You can tell a lot about someone's motor control and global strength by looking at them do a single leg squat. Does their knee dive into valgus? Are they having a Trendelenburg on the other side? Is their ankle mobility appropriate? Do they pop up onto their toes? Their heel lifts up because they can't descend enough because they're losing range of motion at the ankle or the hip joint. Do they look stable during the position? Baseball players actually are in single leg stance a lot. If you think, from the wind up all the way to stride foot landing, they're pivoting over that front leg. We need to make sure that they're stable in that position. If they got poor single leg squat ability, they probably have poor core strength, poor motor control, and it might correlate into having a decreased efficiency through their kinetic chain. So those are the things I look for in the initial evaluation. That's kind of the quick and dirty. So if there's something I missed, tell me about it. Write in the comments section if there's something else you like to look at. I look at quite a bit more than this, especially over the course of their care. But initial evaluation, we're trying to get a sense of what can I help you with today? How can I educate you today? And how do I make you a better human so that you don't get hurt? So thank you so much for tuning in. This is Throwers Thursday, and we're going to show you how to do these next week. Thanks.